Well everyone, it's time for us to go ahead and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S9 and see how this phone holds up in 2023. Now personally, I think this phone is still a very interesting device for the most part. It's turning 5 years old, like it's been almost 5 years since this phone came out, and it's crazy because both the Galaxy S9 and Galaxy S9 Plus were pretty good phones when they first came out, but I think the Galaxy S8 were even more like insane devices when it actually comes down to it. So if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get that from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of the Galaxy S9, you actually had a pretty good feeling body, like it was definitely a premium phone for the most part at that time in 2018. You had a 5.8-inch Super AMOLED display, and as I mentioned for many years now, this was a pretty good panel. It was a 1440p display. You had a 3D touch home button, which I kind of forgot about, but now I remember. It was that little bottom portion. It was a very good, display for the most part. It also curved on the sides, which I loved. And back in 2018, when this phone came out, I thought to myself at that moment, how can Samsung or how can any manufacturer make a phone that looks better than this? I thought this was peak, development. But then shortly after, the Galaxy S10, the S20s came out, and those phones looked way better than this thing. But it's so insane when we look back and we look at devices in this day and age, and we think to ourselves, how can these developers and manufacturers make phones better looking than this? And they end up doing it, which I love when they make developments like that. Now, nothing really else on the display front. I mean, we do have like a 60Hz display, not 120, but it's still perfectly fine. On the bottom, we do have a USB Type-C port, which does have Samsung DeX. So although this phone is unsupported, you still have Samsung DeX support, which is nice. So you can go ahead and plug this thing in to a display and you can get this like desktop experience. It's not just displaying what's ever on the phone. You can toggle Samsung DeX. You can toggle Samsung DeX, and it is a really nice feature for sure. So in terms of the slot in the bottom, very cool thing. You also have a headphone jack on this phone too, and you also have a microSD card slot. This was one of the last phones, the S10 also had it, but this was the second to the last Samsung phone to basically have all three of those things. It was crazy. I think the Galaxy S10 was even more legendary phone, and I was really happy when Samsung kept it on this phone, because even at this moment, a lot of manufacturers were moving away from their headphone jacks. Google, I think, already did away with it at this time, or they were about to pretty much this year. We also had iPhones that already, went away with it too. I think OnePlus did too. So there were a lot of people already swaying away, and, we still had it on this phone, which is so cool. On the back, we did have the standard glass back, which was awesome. Not a frosted glass back that we have nowadays, but still perfectly fine. We had that fingerprint sensor right under the camera though, which was very interesting. Very, very interesting touch. Not really too sure what was going on there, but personally, it is what it is. There's nothing we can really do about it. Samsung did actually move it from the side of the camera, which was even worse, but, it's not a big deal. At least they were making some improvements there. Now, the rest of the back is not anything crazy. We did have IP certification on this phone. We did have wireless charging, which was really nice too. And overall, that kind of covers up this whole entire outside. I still like it. I still think it feels pretty good. It doesn't feel like a cheap phone. And even in this day and age, it still holds up decently well. Now, in the camera department, this is one of the more iffy areas of this phone, and I'll kind of explain why. So we had a single camera setup on the back, 12 megapixel wide angle lens. On the front, we had a dual camera setup. It was mostly just an 8 megapixel wide angle camera that can shoot 1440p videos on the front. Now, I think the camera quality of this phone is still actually pretty decent, and you did have quite a few features built in with this camera UI, which was nice. My main issue with this camera that I have with basically all older cameras is that it is a single camera. There's no software you can download to give yourself an extra camera or anything like that. So the problem with that is that if you still have, a single camera, you're kind of already a little bit outdated. The S9 Plus is in a better situation because it did have, an extra camera. The S10 is in a really good spot too because it does have 3 cameras. This one, not so much. Not saying this is a bad camera, but again, it's just one of those things that, you just kind of have to keep in mind. So with this camera, you still have you have quite a few features built in. If you go inside of the camera UI, you will see several features that, maybe some manufacturers are just now getting onto their phone. And this phone from 2018 has that type of feature set, which is actually really cool. Now, I still think this phone could have done a little bit better. Like I said, if it had multiple cameras, that would have been awesome. Because at this moment, Apple was already doing multiple cameras, I think for at least 2 years. Some other manufacturers were probably doing it for a while too. The only people who took even a longer time than, Samsung was Google. And they took it wasn't until 2020 that they started doing it. So I think the Samsung camera, on this S9 is still good. I think it's not the one I would technically use, but I don't think it's a bad thing either, if that makes any sense. Now in the software and the longevity portion, this is the area that is probably going to be not the worst area, but it's probably going to be the reason why I wouldn't recommend people to buy this phone anymore. And that is because this phone has not only been, unsupported with software, but it's been unsupported with software for like 3 versions of software so far. So this is the weird thing. It's when you have a phone like this that still looks fairly modern, that actually looks like it could still get software support. And when it's been outdated for like 2 versions of software, 3, whatever we're at now, it's actually kind of insane. So the S9, I think, ended off with a One UI 2, or technically One UI 2.5. And I remember when One UI 2.5 came out, that was a big update for sure. And, I liked having, One UI 2 on the S9 over One UI 1 on the S8. I feel like if the S8 got One UI 2, that would have been awesome. And the main reason for this is because of that full-on gesture design. So before, you kind of had it, but it was just like a minimized nav bar button. So you could swipe up from the sides and get into like different apps or whatever, but it wasn't the same. With the S9, you actually had that, full-on gesture design, and it was beautiful. When the Note 9 got it too, that was awesome. And that actually made this phone a little bit more future-proofed. It was actually very interesting. You would never think a software tweak like that can make your phone feel so much more up-to-date, but it actually did. And I was kind of sad when this phone got unsupported with software. I truly do feel like this phone could have lasted for a much longer period of time. Again, there's not really anything we can do about it, but that was one of the things that kind of stood out to me. So in terms of that, I will still say thumbs up for me for sure. I think, it's still a good, it's a good phone for the features it had, but it's unsupported, so I would not recommend buying it anymore. Now on the performance side, this phone did have that Snapdragon 845 chipset inside with 4GB of RAM on all the models. Now, I will still say this performance of this phone isn't that bad, it's definitely not that great, but I still think like for this type of phone, for how old it is, it's still kind of performing kind of okay. Again, it's not a good performing phone anymore compared to the latest and greatest phones that we have now, especially with the lack of 120 Hz, no software support, all those other things, but I still think this is a good performing phone. If you wanted to go ahead and have some sort of like side device for playing like older emulators or older games that are still supported on this phone, then I think this is actually not a bad device. You can get these things all day for super cheap, but again, is it the best choice? Probably not. And, I still think the performance of this phone is still okay, but if you're comparing it to the Galaxy S20, S21, S22, it's definitely not going to be as smooth as those phones. And I would probably argue that a lot of budget phones that are coming out now are probably faster than this thing, and this thing was a flagship of 2018. That's not a knock to this phone. It's mostly just showing the improvement of all the budget phones that we've gotten throughout the last couple years. So to kind of wrap up this whole entire video, what I'll tell you is, I think the Samsung Galaxy S9 is still a very interesting phone. I still think it has a lot of capability and a lot of quality. It just so happens that this phone has just been unsupported with software, and that is kind of the sad situation that we're in. Had this phone continued to get software support, I think that would have been awesome. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So there's really not a whole lot we can do there. We're just going to have to kind of wait it out, to be honest. So in terms of that, I think the S10 is still worth it. I think the S20 and all those other phones are still worth it after, but I probably would not recommend buying the S9 anymore. So in terms of that kind of covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.